The scrapyard stretched for miles, a broken graveyard of metal and forgotten machines. Rusted ship hulls leaned against each other like the skeletons of long-dead beasts, their jagged edges glinting under the pale light of two suns. The air smelled of burnt oil and dust, and every step crunched over broken glass and twisted wires. It was a place where life rarely came, and when it did, it never stayed for long. In the farthest corner of this wasteland, half hidden under the shadow of a shattered cargo pod, lay an alien woman. Her skin was pale and faintly glowing under layers of dirt, her hair tangled and stiff from neglect. Her legs did not move, no matter how much she willed them to. She had tried on the first day, then the second, and by the third she had stopped trying altogether. The injury from the mining collapse had taken her strength, and her people had taken the rest, her hope, her dignity, her place in the world. Her name was Sarah, but no one here spoke it. Not since her family walked away, leaving her among the junk, telling themselves it was the only way to survive. In their culture, the weak were not cared for. They were left behind to make room for the strong. It was a law as old as their bloodlines, and no one questioned it. Now, Sarah's world was nothing but cold metal and the sound of the wind whistling through the wreckage. Small scavenger rats with metal-plated backs crept close at night, sniffing. At her hands, their glowing eyes reflecting the faint light of the stars. She scared them away with a wave of her arm, but even they would return. Hunger made them fearless. She was hungry too. Her stomach ached constantly, twisting and pulling like a living thing inside her. The scraps she found, bits of dried ration, packs, crumbs from the workers' meals, barely kept her alive. Water was even harder to come by. Sometimes she caught the condensation dripping from the pipes. Other times she went without, till her lips cracked and bled. Every day she listened to the sounds of the scrapyard workers in the distance. The clang of metal, the low hum of welding, torches, and the occasional burst of laughter when a deal was struck or a rare part was found. No one came near her corner. No one looked for her. She was invisible, just another piece of discarded scrap. But that changed the day she heard the sound of heavy boots. They were slow, deliberate, crunching over the broken ground. She froze, her heart thudding in her chest. Visitors to this part of the scrapyard were rare and rarely good news. She had learned long ago that those who came close usually wanted something, and it was never to help. The steps grew louder, closer, until the shadow of a tall figure stretched across her face. Sarah squinted against the sun, her eyes adjusting to the shape above her. A human stood there, broad-shouldered and dust-covered, with a weathered coat that brushed against his knees. His face was shadowed under the brim of a battered hat, but his eyes, steady and unflinching, met hers. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The wind howled between the rusted ships, and the silence pressed down on her like a weight. Sarah's first instinct was fear. Humans were rare on this planet, and the stories her people told about them were filled with warning, dangerous, selfish, unpredictable. She had no way to run, no way to fight. Her legs were useless, her body weak. All she could do was wait. The man crouched down, his boots settling into the dust. His gaze swept over her, taking in the torn clothing, the bruised skin, the way she clutched her arms to keep from shivering. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He simply looked at her as if deciding something important. "Can you move?" His voice was deep, carrying easily over the wind. She shook her head. Her throat was dry, the words stuck behind it. He exhaled slowly, glancing at the twisted metal around them. "Then you're coming with me." The words made her flinch. She had heard them before, spoken by others, scavengers, traders, men, who saw her as just another broken thing to claim. But this time, there was something different in the tone. No hunger, no mockery, only certainty. As if he had already decided her fate. Before she could protest, he reached into his coat and pulled out a thick blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders with surprising gentleness. The warmth sank into her cold skin, and she felt a sting in her eyes that had nothing to do with the wind. Then, without asking permission, he slid his arms under her and lifted her as if she weighed nothing at all. Her head rested against his chest, and she could hear the steady beat of his heart. Beneath the layers of fabric, the scrapyard guards at the edge of the lot watched in silence as he carried her past. They had seen men take women before, but never like this. This man didn't drag her. He didn't tie her. He simply carried her, his steps slow and careful, as though she was something precious. Sarah kept her eyes on his face as they left the place she had called her grave for so long. She still didn't know who he was or why he had chosen her, but for the first time in months, the cold inside her began to fade, and somewhere deep within her, a thought took root. Maybe she had not been thrown away completely. Maybe, just maybe she had been found. Jaron was not supposed to be here. His day had started like any other, searching the scrapyard for rare ship parts to sell in the market. He had no plans to carry a living being out with him, especially not an alien woman, half buried in the shadow of rusted metal. But once he saw her, there was no unseeing her. He had walked past wreckage like this 100 times, ignoring the groans of dying machines and the stench of decay. But this was different. Those eyes, wide and frightened, followed him like they were asking a question her lips could not speak. He could have turned away, and no one would have judged him. No one cared who lived or died here. Yet his boots stopped moving. Sarah's breath was shallow, each inhale shaking her thin shoulders. She was waiting for him to leave, just like everyone else had. Jaron felt a weight in his chest, heavier than any engine core he had ever lifted. Maybe it was the way she didn't beg, didn't cry. She simply accepted her fate, as if life had already told her she wasn't worth saving. He hated that look. Without another word, he adjusted his grip on her and carried her toward the scrapyard gates. The guards narrowed their eyes, hands resting on their weapons, but they didn't stop him. One of them smirked and muttered something in his own language. Jaron didn't understand the words, but he knew the tone. They thought he was taking her for the same reason others did. They were wrong. The walk to his workshop was long, the air heavy with heat and dust. Jaron kept his pace steady, shielding Sarah from the sun with the edge of his coat. She barely moved in his arms, her head resting against him, her eyes half closed. The sounds of the scrapyard faded behind them, replaced by the low hum of city streets and the distant call of traders. By the time they reached the outskirts, the sun was dipping toward the horizon, painting the sky in deep gold and red.
Jaron
Pushed open the heavy steel door to his workshop, the familiar scent of oil, metal, and warm air washing over them. Inside, a small furnace glowed in the corner. Casting a soft light across the scattered tools and half-built machines, he set her down on a padded chair near the heat, careful not to jar her legs. She looked around the room, her eyes tracing the shelves lined with strange devices, alien tech, and pieces of old ships. It was cluttered but alive. Every piece had a purpose. Every corner told a story. From the corner of her vision, she saw him disappear into the back room. For a brief moment, panic flared. Was he leaving her? But then he returned, carrying a steaming bowl of thick stew. The smell alone made her mouth ache with hunger. Jaron knelt beside her, holding the bowl. "Out. Eat," he said simply. Sarah hesitated. In her world, nothing was given freely. Food always came with a price. But his eyes were steady, not demanding, not hungry in the way she feared. Slowly she took the bowl, the warmth seeping into her cold fingers. The first spoonful burned her tongue, but she didn't care. The taste was rich, salty, and alive. She ate in small, careful bites, afraid that if she finished too quickly, it might all vanish. Jaron didn't speak while she ate. He only leaned back, arms crossed, watching her as if making sure she would finish every drop. When she set the empty bowl down, she realized her hands had stopped shaking. For the first time in months, her stomach was full, and her body was warm. She met his gaze, still uncertain. "Why?" she asked quietly. He shrugged, his expression unreadable, "Because you were still breathing." It wasn't the answer she expected, but it was the first one that didn't feel like a lie. The furnace's warm glow painted the walls in soft orange light, yet Sarah still felt the cold deep in her bones. Weeks of sleeping on metal and breathing air that carried the taste of rust had left her body drained, her mind on edge. The chair beneath her was far softer than the broken panels she had lain on in the scrapyard. But she sat stiff, her eyes tracking every movement Jaren made. He was moving around the workshop, stacking tools, closing crates, clearing the bench. He didn't look at her much, but she could feel that he was aware of her every shift, every breath. The air between them was thick with questions neither had asked yet. A metallic clink echoed from the far side of the room as he set down a small container. Then he crossed the floor and crouched in front of her again, resting his arms on his knees. His gaze swept over her face, her tangled hair, the bruises on her arms. It was not the gaze of a trader calculating value. It was the gaze of a man trying to decide what to do next. "You're safe here," he said simply. The words caught her off guard. She had heard similar promises before, from voices that turned cruel once the doors closed. But something in the way he spoke, steady, low, without pride or pity, made them sound different. Still, she kept her reply guarded. "Safe," she repeated, her voice quiet, almost tasting the word to see if it fit. He nodded and stood, walking over to the furnace. With a twist of a dial, the flames rose higher, sending more heat through the room. The temperature shifted slowly, wrapping around her like a blanket. For the first time in too long, she felt the ache in her fingers and toes ease. A faint smell of fabric and soap reached her nose. She turned to see him pulling a folded blanket from a shelf and laying it across her lap. She hesitated before pulling it around herself, the softness pressing against skin that had known only hard, unyielding surfaces for months. Jaren didn't hover over her. Instead, he moved to a small work table at the edge of the room, his hands busy with something she couldn't quite see. Small sparks lit the air, followed by the quiet whir of machinery. Her eyes narrowed as she tried to make sense of the shapes, bits of metal, wires, and strange connectors. She had seen parts like these before, but never assembled in such a careful, deliberate way. He noticed her watching. "Repairs," he said. "Old things that still have life in them." She almost laughed. Almost because she wasn't sure if he was talking about the machines or about her. Time passed. In quiet hums and soft clinks of metal on metal, the night was settling in, bringing the kind of cold that could kill the unprotected. Sarah's thoughts wandered, circling back to the same question that had been in her mind since he lifted her from the scrapyard. Why me? She didn't believe in luck, and she didn't believe in kindness without cost. Yet here she was, in a warm room, her stomach full, her body wrapped in blankets, while others in the scrapyard still shivered and starved. The warmth began to make her eyelids heavy. Her body wanted rest, but her mind still held on to the edge of wakefulness. She had learned long ago that sleep could be dangerous, that safety could vanish the moment you closed your eyes. But as she listened to the steady rhythm of Jaren's work, the faint crackle of the furnace, and the soft whistle of wind against the windows, something in her began to loosen. Her hands, once clenched in her lap, slowly uncurled. She told herself she would only rest for a moment, just until the tiredness eased. But the last thing she felt before drifting into sleep was the deep, steady heat of the room and the faint, strange sense that maybe this was not a trap at all. Asterisk, when Sarah woke, the room was still warm, but the light had changed. A pale morning glow slipped through the high window, brushing across the scattered tools and glinting off polished metal. She shifted under the blanket, the faint ache in her body reminding her that she was still alive and still here. Jaren was at the workbench again, a half-assembled device spread before him. His coat hung on a hook by the door, his sleeves rolled up, revealing arms marked by small burns and faint scars. He worked with quiet precision, but when he noticed her stirring, he set the tool down and turned to face her. "You sleep like someone who hasn't rested in months," said, his voice even. Her lips twitched, not quite a smile, not quite a frown. "Because I haven't," she replied. The space between them felt heavy, as if unspoken words were hanging in the air. Jaren didn't push, but his gaze told her he wanted to understand. She hesitated, telling her story had never brought her anything but pity or disgust. Yet something about this man, with his quiet steadiness and lack of empty promises, made her feel the urge to speak. She looked down at her legs, the useless weight beneath the blanket, then back up to meet his eyes. It happened in the mines. She began. The tunnels collapsed. Support beam fell before I could move. I thought they would help me, my family, my people. But on my world, if you cannot work, you cannot stay. They left me there, and the rescue crew brought me to the scrapyard. Her voice stayed calm, but her fingers dug into the blanket. That is how my people survive. They call it tradition. They call it mercy. But it is neither. Jaren listened, without interrupting, his face unreadable. She searched his expression for the judgment she was used to seeing, but found none. Since then, she continued, I have been nothing. No work. No home. No place. You asked me yesterday if I could move. I cannot. And even if I could, I don't know where I would go. The room was quiet for a long moment. The only sound was the soft hum of the furnace. Jaren's eyes had shifted, no longer just observing but calculating, as if something had taken shape in his mind. He glanced at her legs, and then at the strange device on his bench. It was a frame of metal shaped in two halves, with joints that bent like knees and thin cables that wound through the structure. You've been thrown away, he said finally, but I don't throw things away if they still have life in them. Her brow furrowed. Machines? Maybe not people? His mouth tilted in the faintest hint of a smile. Machines. People, same principle. Just need the right parts, the right care. She followed his gaze to the device and felt a strange mix of hope and fear stir in her chest. She didn't understand exactly what he was building, but she could feel it had something to do with her, and that thought alone made her pulse quicken. Sarah had seen many kinds of looks in her life. Pity from strangers, disgust from her own kind, greed from those who thought her weakness made her easy prey. But the way Jaren was looking at her now was none of those. His eyes carried something else, something sharp and deliberate. As if he had already made a decision and was only waiting for her to catch up, he wiped his hands on a worn cloth, then gestured toward the strange device on the bench. Do you know what this is? She shook her head. It's something I've been working on for a long time, he said. A frame, powered by scavenged servo motors, designed to move with a person's body instead of against it. I built it to help carry heavy loads through the scrapyard, but with some changes, it could carry you. Her breath caught. She stared at the machine, the cables glinting under the light. It's the smooth curve of the metal shaped like a human leg. No, like her legs should have been. You mean? Walk, she whispered. I mean live, he replied. Sarah's hands tightened around the blanket. The idea seemed too big, too dangerous. She had long stopped dreaming about walking. It was safer to accept her fate than to hope for something that could be ripped away again. What if it doesn't work, she asked, her voice quiet. What if I fall again? Jaren's reply came without hesitation. Then I'll lift you back up. As many times as it takes. She searched his face for a crack in his words, a sign that he was lying or playing some game. But all she found was that same calm certainty she had seen when he first stood over her in the scrapyard. You're offering me something no one else would, she said, her throat tight. Why? He leaned closer, resting his hands on the bench beside the device. Because the world is already full of people who walk away. I'd rather be the one who stays. The warmth from the furnace brushed against her skin, but the heat she felt now came from somewhere deeper. A tremor of hope pushed against the wall she had built around herself. For the first time in so long, she wasn't thinking about how to survive the next day. She was imagining what it might be like to truly live it. The workshop smelled of heated metal and faint ozone as Jaren tightened the last bolt. The frame of the mechanical legs gleamed under the light, each joint moving with a smooth, precise click when he tested it. Sarah sat on the edge of the padded chair, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her fingertips. Ready? Jaren asked, his voice steady but softer than usual. She didn't answer right away, but her hands rested on her lap, fingers curling against the blanket she had been wrapped in for days. Fear sat heavy in her chest, not of pain, but of hope. Hope was dangerous. Jaren knelt in front of her, lifting the frame carefully. "We'll go slow. You control the movement, the legs will follow. I'll be right here." The first strap wrapped around her thigh, warm against her skin. The second locked at her knee, the cool metal hugging her like an anchor and a promise at the same time. Cable by cable, connection by connection, the frame became part of her. When he was done, Jaren stepped back, his hands resting lightly at her sides. "Now, try." She gripped the arms of the chair, her breath uneven. For a moment she stayed still, her mind screaming that this was impossible. But then her fingers tightened, her shoulders shifted forward, and she pushed. The weight shifted beneath her, the joints of the frame responding with a hiss of powered movement. Her legs began to straighten. She rose slowly, every inch upward, feeling like a climb through thick air. Her balance wavered, her knees threatening to buckle, but Jaren's hands caught her, steadying her without forcing her. "You're doing it?" said his voice low, but filled with something fierce. Her head lifted, her eyes meeting his. Was standing. The first time since the mines crushed her body and her life. She was looking at the world from her full height again. Her breath came in sharp bursts, not from exhaustion, but from the shock of it, from the way her heart felt. Too big for her chest. A sound escaped her, not a sob, not a laugh, but something raw and unshaped. The sound of a soul remembering it was still alive. She took one step, the frame moving in perfect rhythm with her. Then another. The workshop floor stretched out. Before her, like an entirely new world, Jaren didn't let go, but he didn't lead. He walked beside her, as if they were equals. And with each step, the cold shadow of the scrapyard fell further behind. The sound of her footsteps filled the workshop, uneven at first, then stronger with each try. The mechanical frame hummed quietly, matching her every move. Outside, the morning sun spilled gold across the dusty street, and for the first time in months, Sarah did not feel trapped behind a wall of rust and shadows. Jaren stood beside her as she reached the open doorway. The cold air brushed against her face, carrying with it the scent of the world beyond. People in the street slowed their steps to stare. They had seen her before, the broken alien woman in the scrapyard, the one left to die, but now she stood tall, her head high, her eyes sharp and alive. Word spread quickly. By afternoon, her own people came, drawn by the whispers. Her family was among them, their expressions shifting between disbelief and unease. They had left her to be forgotten, yet here she was, standing without their help, standing because a stranger had chosen not to walk away. One of them stepped forward, starting to speak, but Sarah raised a hand. Her voice was calm, steady, carrying across the street. "I am not yours to claim. I was never yours to throw away." Her gaze shifted to Jaren, who had not moved from her side. The furnace heat from the workshop behind them mixed with the sunlight on her skin, and she felt a steady strength inside her that had nothing to do with the mechanical frame. The faces of her family blurred into the crowd, but she did not care. She had no interest in going back to the people who had measured her worth in what she could give them. She turned toward the road ahead instead, feeling the weight of Jaren's quiet presence beside her. The scrapyard had once been her grave, a place where life ended. Now it was only the place where she had been found. And as she stepped forward, into the world beyond, she knew one thing with absolute certainty: she would never be left behind again.